Hey everybody, I'm Reverend Jim. This is the whole Bible. We are going through the whole Bible from beginning to end. Last week we did Genesis 1 and 2. Today we're in Genesis chapters 3 through 5. Next week we'll pick up with chapter 6 and beyond. And yes, we are doing the whole Bible from beginning to end. Also, you don't know what word I just said there. The whole entire Bible, the whole amazing Bible, the whole fill in the blank Bible. That's the point. So for anyone last week who was commenting on my first words, they're a mystery, and that's on purpose. Okay, Genesis 3 through 5. So this is often referred to, one simple way to refer to this would be the first people, because we're going to meet a lot of the first people in this story. We met a couple last week, Adam and Eve, maybe you've heard of them, although technically she's not Eve until this one. We'll get to that in a minute. But now we get a whole lot more people. And this section also is commonly known as the fall. Now, that carries a lot of connotations. People hear the fall and they immediately go to original sin and all sorts of things. And that's, we need a longer video to talk about Augustine and all of that imposition and what it's done to society and individuals and theology. But I think it is fair to say that this is the part of the story when everything that in chapters 1 and 2 was seen as good, very good, everything begins to fall apart. So yeah, there is a fall happening here. Things are beginning to fracture and crack, and the goodness of creation, we got some less than good things going on. So let's take a quick look at what these three chapters are, a little overview, and then we'll watch some videos within a video. Ooh, that's like an Inception moment. Videos within a video. Okay, let's see. These three chapters. I would say you could start with the first one, chapter 3. This is Eve, Adam, and a snake. Those are the characters. That's the drama. You probably know the flannel graph already. Chapter 4, Cain and Abel. They got a couple kids. We got a little sibling rivalry going on and a bit more. We'll get into that too. And then chapter 5 is from Adam to Noah. This is all the generations from that first one to the guy we're going to really talk about next week. Now, let's just take a look though. Genesis 3 through 5. These chapters trace the early unfolding of human freedom, consequence, and community, moving from harmony to alienation, yet holding threads of grace throughout it. Genesis 3, the story of the garden and the fall, is less about sin in a judicial sense and more a profound exploration of human awakening, moral consciousness, shame, and the complexity of choice. The serpent functions not as pure evil, but as a catalyst for wisdom. Also, by the way, we don't really get the name Satan for this serpent character. That's kind of a after the fact, looking back over the shoulder, making the connections. In the story here, it's just this catalyst for wisdom, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God's response is both judgment and care, clothing these naked humans who notice their shame for the very first time, who are growing up, awakening, and God sends them into a wider, more difficult world. So maybe it's not about sin, but it's about societal awakening. Remember, Genesis, the whole book, is myth and legend. The first 10 chapters are myth, then it's legend. So these are not history. This is not a history book, not a science book. This is people making meaning of how they got to where they are, and we continue to do that today. That's chapter 3. Chapter 4 deepens the theme of rupture through Cain and Abel, these two brothers, revealing how envy and violence distort human relationships, but also how divine mercy endures as God marks Cain for protection rather than annihilation. You might know that story. You know, they bring offerings, sacrifices to God. God finds one of them more pleasing than the other. The brothers have a little and it doesn't turn out too good. Cain ends up killing his brother Abel. My favorite part is there's this line when Cain goes to God, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And God doesn't technically say no. Because, yeah, I think you are your brother's keeper. That's kind of one of the subtexts of that story. All right, but then Genesis 5. This is where we trace the generations from Adam to Noah. We started with Adam last week. Noah's coming next week. This chapter bridges the two. And this chapter portrays both the persistence of life and the shadow of mortality. We get a lot of dates when people die, although they do live to be a long time in this story. Remember, myth and legend. Now, from a progressive perspective, these three chapters explore the human condition, our capacity for creativity and harm, the growth of moral agency, and the enduring presence of divine compassion, and the call to build community even east of Eden. That's a phrase in the text. They went east of Eden. Maybe you've read the book, East of Eden. What does it mean to go beyond where we started and still build community outside of that origin space? All right, so here's what I initially called these three chapters, but here's some different titles we might use to kind of see them in a fresh way. Instead of Eve, Adam, and the snake, It could be shame in a name. This is the first time shame is mentioned in the Bible. They noticed they were naked and they felt ashamed. That is the origin of that word in this origin story of beginning. So this goodness suddenly has an awakening, a realization of what's been true the whole time, and then they feel a different way about it. Oh, there's so much to that. And this is also shame and a name. This is where Eve gets a name. See, prior to this, God told Adam to name all the animals. So he's like dog, cat, goat, platypus, you know what I mean. But he doesn't name Eve. Eve doesn't get a name. Adam is not his name. It's just a description of what he is from dirt. And woman is just a description as well. Eve is a name. So Adam names Eve after the fall. This says something about men claiming hierarchy over women as a result of this fracture and fall to the good creation. This isn't an ideal that we see prior. This is not an ideal we see prior to that point, but it's a result of things not being the way maybe they should have or could have been. So that's something about patriarchy and misogyny in our society. Whew. All right, the next chapter, chapter 4. What if we call this farmers versus shepherds? This is not a story about just sibling rivalry and two brothers who end up in a accident in the wilderness. No, this is a story of societal evolution, of farmers versus shepherds, and which aspect of society is going to thrive and survive in the competition within the two. When I make my boundary and plant my things and keep that organized versus your animals that roam all over the place. It's a move. When we start farming, agrarian society gives some sense of control over the ground, and we cultivate out of it. There's a goodness to that, but it's also an imposition. So I think you could say this chapter is a glimpse of societal evolution and understanding how we got to where we are. And then that last one, we could call this 10 generations later, because this is 10 generations from Adam to Noah. And we get a couple characters you might recognize. Enoch, you may have heard of his name before. He doesn't die in this chapter. He just walks with God. One of a couple people in the Bible to do that. Interesting. And then Methuselah, you might know him as the oldest person in the Bible. That's what it says. The number on the page makes him the oldest. I forget the number, 1,000 something. Here it is. That old. That's really old. My goal is to live to be 117. And that's old enough for me. Now, again, this is myth. This is not history. This is not science. This is using numbers to do something, to say something, to give grand narratives. But it's worth pointing this out. When I was in high school, I was a Bible geek. I still am a Bible geek. And I was going through the book of Genesis, counting up all of the genealogies. I wanted to do the math based on the numbers on the page. So I would look at, what does it say? Who was alive when? When did generations overlap? Like every 18-year-old does on their study hall. And what I noticed, you do the math yourself. If you do the numbers, especially in this chapter, you'll notice Methuselah dies the same year the flood in the book of Genesis happens. So maybe he just didn't get his ticket on the boat, I guess. Okay, so there you have it. There's a little bit on Genesis 3, 4, and 5. Now let's watch 3 quick videos. By quick, I mean 1 minute, because these are from the Bible in a Minute Project. You should definitely go check all those out. There's a whole lot of them. We're doing the entire Bible 1 minute, 1 day at a time. And let's watch 3 of them. You're going to hear Reverend Amanda Meisenheimer talk about Genesis 3, Reverend Ben Perry talk about Genesis 4, and me talk about Genesis chapter 5. And we'll have some questions, so take a look. Here we go.
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 3. A crafty and manipulative snake coerces Eve into eating some fruit from the forbidden tree. She extends this fruit to Adam, who eats it, and they both discover that they are naked because their eyes have been opened. We learn that God goes on noisy walks. When God discovers Adam and Eve, God proclaims them to be cursed and explains the consequences of their actions. Then God clothes the disobedient pair and then sends them out of the Garden of Eden to protect them from the tree of eternal life. So, what kind of God are we dealing with here? A God who curses an entire species for having a forbidden snack, a God who goes on walks, is a fashion designer, and protects us from danger? Both?
And this is Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 4. And you already know this story. It's Cain and Abel, 2 brothers, one a farmer, one a shepherd. They both send up offerings to God. God looks at Cain's offering and is like, but looks at Abel's offering and gets real excited. And Cain gets big mad and murders Abel in a jealous rage. What's fascinating about this story is that God doesn't shit on Cain's offering. Not like God looks at Cain and says, oh, you worthless excuse for a human, you'll never be good. God is just more excited about Abel because Abel puts all of himself into what he is given. For Cain, it's not actually about pleasing God. It's about being better than Abel in God's eyes. What we find here is a condemnation of religious supremacy, of a faith that is more about being better and more favored by God than somebody else. And that kind of faith kills.
Bible in a minute. Genesis chapter 5. This is the list of the descendants of Adam. Adam to Seth, to Enosh, to Kenan, to Mahalalel, to Jared, to Enoch, to Methuselah, to Lamech, to Noah. You might recognize some of these names. Enoch ended up walking with God. Methuselah was the really old one. And Noah? Do you need an ark? Because I know a guy. Now, bad Bible jokes aside, this is one of those chapters that you probably just skim right past, ready for the story to pick up with Noah and his infamous ark. But before you open your umbrella and move on to the impending precipitation, slow down and sit with these names. No, this is not a historical record of birth certificates, but it's a narrative history of the mythic characters who connect us from one global event to another, from the world's divine creation to its sudden and very wet destruction. And perhaps this list of names, stories really, invites you to reflect on the generations that have led to this moment and to your life. Whose shoulders are you standing upon? And where is your story headed next? All right, first question as always, what stands out to you? What do you notice in everything I've just shared? Anything that you've never thought of before? Any new details that I missed that you want to bring to the surface? Drop them in a comment. Or here's some specific questions that might help us process these 3 chapters as well. How does the story change if we see it as the awakening rather than the fall? What does it mean to be your brother's keeper in our world today? And the third one, what legacy do you carry and what legacy do you hope to send ahead? Thinking of all those generations. So there you go. There's some questions. There's some things to think about. Leave a comment. And next week we'll be back looking at Genesis 6 through 9 with the story of Noah. So go catch up on the first week if you missed it. Get ready for the next week. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye.